Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our educational series on the 7 stages of life, presented by the B-Zone with Frank Marrero, who is a teacher and a devotee of Adida Samraj, and Ed Reether, founder of B-Zone. And if you are following the series, we did an introduction to the 7 stages, and tonight we're going to focus in on the first stage of life. So, Frank, we've been reading a little bit about the first stage of life, and that generally covers from the ages of 1 to 7.
0 to 7.
0 to 7. So 0 must mean a prenatal development.
Well, there's different traditions have different accountings. One significant moment is at the moment of conception.
Meaning that
when the sperm goes through into the egg, that's one accounting of when the first stage begins. Because, as Adida points out, the psychophysical environment at that moment has a annealing effect upon the whole developmental process.
Okay, so just so I understand it, that this physical incarnation that we're speaking about is not just a physical molecular phenomenon.
No, as he points out, we tend to think in our abstraction, our adolescent third stage abstraction, that we have a interiority and a feeling dimension and a mental dimension in a world that's physical.
Correct.
We tend to think, because of our maladaptation or lack of fuller human maturity, that we are physical things in a physical world with this epiphenomena of thought and emotions. That's how we tend to think, rationally. But as he points out, that we are psychophysical events in a psychophysical universe. There's not we're not psychophysical in a physical universe. There is a unity. Universe is aptly named.
So at one point when we're talking about that 0 to 7 kind of inception of life into physical form is actually a spiritual event.
Absolutely, because the psychophysical, spiritual assemblage of threads, what the ancients called the spindle destiny, is there's a significant thing to be noted about the moment of conception.
Okay, and at some point in time the spirit enters the physical, whether it might be at the moment that the egg and the sperm come together, or...
Well, the spirit entering is even a wrong view.
Right.
Spirit is all pervading. We become associated in identity. So therefore you say the spirit enters, but spirit is universal. But that is a significant moment. Another significant moment in the onset of the first stage of life is the moment of birth. So that the being feels itself separate from the mother.
Has it?
Not just the difficulty of the birth canal, when that umbilical cord is cut, the being no longer is in a constant contiguousness with that which sustains it. And so that, as he says, there's the sense of me, or this, whatever this is, and everything else. And he says that is the shock of birth. It doesn't have anything to do with if you had a water birth or a cesarean. That moment when you are on your own, so to speak.
So in the physical sense, when that, let's say, umbilical cord is cut.
And the Greeks would say, you take your first breath. That's why the word psyche means to breathe. It's rooted in the word meaning to breathe. So from the first breath. So the umbilical cord first breath is a singularity.
Right.
But then there is this felt sensation of there's me and there's everything else.
In the physical sense.
In the physical sense.
There's not a mind.
No, it's way prior to mind.
Prior to mind.
Yeah,
prior to verbal.
Right.
Prior to all kind of what we conceive
as conception.
As conception.
Doesn't even exist. Even almost perception doesn't even really exist.
Right.
Because there's not an organizational matrix in place yet, really. I mean, there's maybe some substratum that's making resonances, but basically no. It's just pre-mind, pre-verbal, a felt sense. And you can discover it, you can feel it yourself. There's me and everything else.
Right.
You have that basic bodily sense.
As you said in the other interview, when you look down and see your foot.
It considers to be down there. No, I'm talking, no, that's a third stage of life error, or an immaturity of the third. That's a perceptual and conceptual. But this is prior to all of that. It's just a felt sense of me as identity in the body and everything else. And now, another moment happens soon thereafter that's also significant, and that Adida points out, is when the being nurses or feeds, it takes that pleasure of feeding as the primary reward or consolation for having individuated.
Ah, so there's a kind of an association with pleasure, food, sustenance, and as a sense of individual identity. Right,
and it gets pleasure is the reward. If you have that sensation, oh, at first there's that sensation, there's me and everything else, and you're an individual in some super rudimentary way, and therefore you want something, you want sustenance, you want connection, you want that which you just were separated from, and so you have the pleasure of nursing, and that pleasure then is your consolation. That's right. That's right. Now you're a separate something.
So that touch, touch is the primary communication in infancy.
Yes, touch and slash pleasure.
Right.
Right. Feeding.
Okay. All right.
And now, as he pointed out, as we talked about last time, when we're prior to birth, we are in a condition of unity with our environment through identity. We're the same as the environment, so to speak. The mother and the child are there's a unity there. But from the moment of birth, from the moment of that first breath and that cut, the being will seek to be reunited, because now what you have to do is the process of growing up, as we'll see. The unity will then be reestablished in human maturity through relationship rather than identity.
Now, is this a place where you can also apply the adage that is also in the tradition but also in Adida, is that separation is inherent, fear is inherent in this separation from source.
Right, as Adida loves to point out from the Upanishads, wherever there is an other, fear arises. Right.
So actually fear is part of the body.
Yeah, it's right. It's the other side of the pleasure, pain. You know, you're afraid that you're going to be, the I, the individual is going to be extinguished, and therefore I need to seek that which union, need to seek union. So fear and pain, pleasure are really a singularity, just seen from different angles.
So that's probably why the baby always needs to feel the comfort of the mother and the warmth, which is part of the development. You need the development of all of this.
Right, because as he points out, as you mature, you're going to reestablish a felt sense of unity first through a sense of relationship. Now, as a baby, that relationship is pretty crude, as we would, or gross. And then as we develop through these stages, that sense of relationship and that felt sense of connectedness will also have its own maturation. Because there is no separation. It's just a felt sense. It's an illusion.
Right. But it's a bodily based sense.
Right.
So then with that becomes then
the focus.
Right.
Of that first stage of life then is bodily based pleasure.
And avoiding the fear that is.
Yeah, but we don't like to talk about that.
No.
We just want the good thing. We don't want to talk about the bad stuff. Yes, of course.
Yeah. But that's all not even in a conscious level.
No.
It's all.
Or other than I want more candy. I mean, that's how much.
As the development of that childhood, infancy develops into a baby, into a young
kid,
child,
and all, et cetera, et cetera. Except here's where this is also useful for adults. where is that in you?
Ah,
Where is that in
okay,
us?
so this is not just for speaking about infancy or childhood.
Also.
Because without a full understanding of this developmental
Process.
Mm-hmm. That you as an adult could be at an infant level of
infantile
level of adaptation to things like food.
Exactly. And to pleasure itself.
Pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure itself. And as adults, we know that the greatest pleasure, as Adidas says so succinctly, the greatest pleasure a human being can encounter below the heart is sexuality. So while sexuality is more associated with the later stages of human development and stages of life, even still, its fundamental pleasure is still first stage-ish.
Right, and that's where little children play with their genital fluids.
Of course, and a basic sense of pleasure, right, which is totally wonderful and everything. But I just want to make the distinction that sexuality is also first stage-ish in a way.
Right, because of the body and
the attachment to pleasure, the seeking for pleasure, the need for pleasure, and that And so, as adults, we have to critically self-examine to see how we are unconsciously
seeking pleasure.
Seeking pleasure.
Well, that could really bring into not only sex, but to all kinds of experiences.
Absolutely. Sensation is another version of that. Experience. Wowie zowie. I'm the worst one of all in human history. One of the worst of wanting experience.
So the extremes would be always needing to stimulate the body with physical exercise or any kinds of pleasures, endorphins.
Indulgences of all kinds, consolations of all kinds, stimulants of all kinds. This is all a sign of disharmony in the first stage of life for adults. So when we, as adults, we have to bring that's one of the reasons we bring a disciplined, we follow Adidas admonitions, as many great teachers, of harmonizing and disciplining the first stage of life. In the past, those teachings have had a negative orientation. The body's bad. Turn away from the body and look. You're above the body, and like we talked about before.
Right.
But Adida is not subject to that kind of narrowness. The body's to be fully enjoyed altogether. There's nothing bad about it, but we do. Still doesn't mean we don't discipline.
Right.
Bring a discipline, bring a harmonization to it, bring a spiritualization to it. Submit the body in service to the Great One.
Right. Because as he's brought into the teaching, is that this is a pleasure world. This is a pleasure dome. Right. This is not just.
Well, the world is a pleasure dome when you are harmonized.
Right.
And then harmonization necessarily implies restraint. The word Socrates used to love to say, put the two words sophrene and Sophia together. One means restraint, the other means wisdom. So restraint is the root of wisdom in that regard.
So, I mean, to just get the foundation here, we could just say the seeking of pleasure is a very primary element of the first stage of life.
That's right. It certainly is.
Yeah.
Whatever your age. Whatever our age, sorry.